After the divorce, my parents cut me out of their lives and left me completely on my own. Years later, I inherited $1 million from my grandfather, who always believed in me. Suddenly, my parents showed up again, asking for money to cover my father's debts and help my half-brothers. But I don't owe them anything. I was 11 when my parents told me they were getting divorced. At first, I thought it was a joke. Not because it sounded funny, but because they never fought. No yelling, no slammed doors, no tension. Just a calm talk at the kitchen table. Mom said she'd fallen in love with someone else. Dad said the same. It felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced it before I got home from school. Mom moved out within the week. Her boyfriend had a place not far away. Dad's new girlfriend moved in the same day Mom left and brought her twin sons with her, both my age. I was told I'd live 1 week with each parent, that it would be easy because they lived close, that nothing had to really change. But everything changed. I watched my mother carry boxes out of the house while another woman brought hers in. My home stopped feeling like mine overnight. Dad's girlfriend wasn't cruel, just distant, like I was in the way. Her sons made sure I knew I didn't belong there. They picked fights, stole my things, laughed when I sat alone. I tried to stay invisible. I ate dinners quietly, kept my door shut, and hoped each week would go fast. Mom's place wasn't much better. At first, I thought I'd spend more time with her, but then she got pregnant. Her boyfriend never said anything mean, but he looked at me like I was some awkward reminder that his life wasn't perfect. They cuddled constantly, whispered to each other in the kitchen, made weekend plans that didn't include me. I spent most of my time in my room with headphones on, trying not to hear or feel anything. Little by little, I started spending more nights at my aunt's place. She was Dad's older sister, my godmother. She lived alone, never married after her husband died when I was a kid. With her, things were calm. She made my favorite soup, asked how school was going, remembered what I liked. No one looked at me like I was interrupting something. She didn't ask me to explain why I was there so often. She just welcomed me in. After a while, I just stayed. 1 week turned into 2, then a month, then the rest of the year. No one really noticed. Mom thought I was with Dad. Dad thought I was with Mom. 3 months passed before either of them realized I was gone. When my aunt finally called and told them, they both apologized, said they'd gotten mixed up. But I already knew the truth. I was no longer part of their new lives. I had my birthday at my aunt's that year. She made a cake, invited 2 of my friends from school. We had pizza and stayed up late. It should have been a good night. But around 8 p.m., I looked at my phone and realized neither of my parents had called. Not even a text. They hadn't forgotten. They just didn't remember. I didn't cry. I just went to the bathroom, turned off the lights, and sat on the edge of the tub for maybe 40 minutes, listening to the hum of the fan, thinking about nothing and everything. That was the moment I stopped expecting anyone to come back for me. After that birthday, I stopped expecting anything from them. I didn't check my phone 100 times a day. I didn't wonder if next time would be different. I just stayed at my aunt's house, like I'd always belonged there. Mom didn't call. Dad didn't either. If they asked about me, it was probably in passing. Like, he's probably with the other one. No one asked me directly. No one reached out. At first, I still followed the weekly rotation, just because that was the rule. But slowly it stopped working. Dad always had an excuse. A trip, house guests, something planned with the twins. Mom's pregnancy became the reason I wasn't convenient to have around. I didn't argue. I stayed with my aunt. Every time she welcomed me like nothing was wrong. Dad stopped sending money not long after I unofficially moved in. At first, my aunt reminded him, gently, without blame. Then she stopped. If he wants to talk, let him call you himself, she said. But I didn't want to. I didn't even know what I'd say. How do you explain to someone that you're still their child, but you don't feel like it? I started helping around the house. Dishes, trash, groceries. After school, I worked with her in the greenhouse. She ran a plant business. Rows of herbs, vegetables, flowers. She kept neat notebooks and labels for everything. I liked it. For the first time, I felt useful. Not like a burden, like someone who mattered. Sometimes I overheard her phone calls with my parents. Calm but sharp. She'd tell them I had been sick and they hadn't even checked in. That I needed support, and all I got was silence. I never heard their replies, just long pauses. Then she'd walk back in, smile like nothing happened, and ask if I wanted pancakes or dumplings. Once she lost it. It was early fall. I was doing homework at the kitchen table. She was watering plants on the porch. Suddenly, she dropped the watering can, grabbed her phone, and called Dad. She yelled. I'd never heard her voice like that. Aren't you ashamed? Your son lives in the same city and you haven't asked about him in 3 months. He called me about a week later, said, sorry, I thought you were with your mom. I said, I'm not with her, or with you. Then I hung up. He didn't call back. Mom didn't call at all. Another few months passed like that. I still wasn't officially living with my aunt, but no one questioned it. It was easier to pretend that this was normal. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a home. Not because of whose name was on the mailbox or whose DNA I carried, but because I was wanted. She started calling me my boy sometimes, half joking, half real. She bought me clothes, asked about my classes, packed lunches if I was out late. Slowly, I started understanding. Family isn't just who made you. It's who shows up. It's who remembers your birthday. Who knows how you take your tea? Who stays even when you have nothing to offer? I didn't even notice when I stopped going back to my parents' houses. There was no exact date, no big argument, no dramatic moment. It just happened. One day I realized it had been months since I'd seen either of them, and no one seemed to notice. No one asked when I was coming over. No one texted to see if I was alive. I was 14 by then. I was growing, changing, picking up new habits and hobbies. I started exercising more, helping out at my aunt's plant nursery, even signed myself up for extra English classes. I was living an entire life, and none of them were part of it. They only called when my aunt reminded them, on holidays, once in a while just to say, "We love you," like it was a script they had to read. It never sounded real. They never asked about what I was actually doing. "How are you?" was just small talk. They didn't want the answer. At first I was angry, then I just let it go. I didn't want them to fix anything anymore. I just wanted them to stop pretending. I wanted them to stop pretending they still cared. It would have been easier if they just admitted it and disappeared for good. At school, everyone knew I lived with my aunt. Some classmates pitied me, others were jealous. She was kind, always packed my lunch, smiled when she picked me up. Eventually, she started coming to parent-teacher conferences. The school switched her number to be the primary contact. The nurse's file had her name on it too. Everything but the official paperwork said I was her child. She never complained. Never once said I was a burden. She said she liked having someone in the house again, that the silence had been too heavy before. And I believed her. Sometimes I'd have dreams where Mom walked into the room and told me everything had been a mistake, that she wanted to fix it all. But I'd wake up and realize I didn't want it fixed, not anymore. I didn't want to go back, not to any version of before. What stayed with me the most was that neither of them, not my mom, not my dad, ever tried to bring me back. No calls, no texts asking where I'd gone or why. It was easier for them that way. Quiet, less responsibility. Once I overheard my aunt on the phone with a friend. She said, "He grew up without them, on his own, and now it's too late." I pretended I didn't hear it, but I did, and I think she was right. After that, everything settled. I had a routine. I lived in a house where someone wanted me there. I made my own breakfast, raked leaves in the yard, read books at night. Sometimes I felt a kind of emptiness, not because something was missing, but because I understood too well. I was my own family now, and my aunt was the only adult who ever chose me not out of obligation, but out of love. No one ever asked where I was. No one ever came looking. If it hadn't been for her, they probably would have erased me completely. I went to graduation with my aunt. We couldn't decide what I'd wear. I told her I'd just put on an old shirt or my school blazer. It felt like just another formality, not a real milestone. But she shook her head and said, "Your grandfather sent something. Said you should look proper. Said you should choose." I was surprised. My grandfather, my dad's father, lived out in the countryside. We barely saw each other, but he called my aunt sometimes, asked how I was doing. She never told me, said she didn't want to get my hopes up. But now she handed me an envelope. It had just enough money for a suit. We went shopping together. It was a quiet, strange day, almost cheerful. My aunt made jokes with the sales lady. I grumbled while trying things on, but inside something was shaking. Not from joy exactly, but because someone, just one person in my bloodline, had remembered me, on their own, without being asked. At graduation, everyone was there. Parents, siblings, grandparents, people laughing, taking pictures, holding flowers. It didn't hurt. I already knew who would and wouldn't show up. My aunt and I stood off to the side. We took a picture in front of the school. I held my diploma and realized this wasn't just the end of school. It was the end of a part of my life where I still waited for them. Mom didn't come. Dad didn't either. And I knew they hadn't forgotten. They just decided it wasn't important enough. After the ceremony, we got ice cream, sat on a bench in the park. She looked at me with that soft smile of hers, part pride, part sadness, and said, "You know, he really kept up with you. He always asked how you were." I nodded. For the first time in a while, I wanted to say, "I can feel that," but I didn't. I just said, "Tell him thank you." Later that night, I took off the suit and hung it carefully in the closet, sat on the edge of the bed. My diploma was on the table. My phone was silent, no messages, no missed calls. I opened a small box of old keepsakes and found a birthday card, one my grandfather had sent when I was 10. "Be proud of yourself, even if no one's standing next to you." I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. That evening, I sat down to fill out my university enrollment forms. My aunt helped me organize everything, checking lists, sorting papers. There was a section for parent contact. I wrote her name, no hesitation, no second thoughts, no explanations, because it couldn't be anyone else. That day was a turning point for me, the last one, the end of childhood, the end of hoping someone might still show up. My grandfather passed quietly. It happened that summer, just a few months before I was supposed to leave for university. My aunt woke me up early, sat at the edge of my bed, and simply said, "He's gone." I knew who she meant. There was no one else it could have been. We drove to the village the next day. His house looked exactly the same. Warm, neat, a little old-fashioned. The same lace curtains still hung on the porch window. Everything felt quieter, like even the wind didn't want to disturb anything. While my aunt sorted through some documents, I wandered around the yard. The shed still held all his tools, each one hanging in perfect order. In the dining room was a framed photo of me at 8, with his hand on my shoulder. I hadn't noticed that detail before, but now it stood out. The funeral was simple, just the way he'd wanted it. No speeches, no fuss, a few wreaths, a few people, earth, silence. But that's when I saw my parents together for the first time in years. They stood off to the side, dressed a little too formally, a little too perfectly. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like anticipation. My aunt didn't seem surprised. Later that night, she said, "They're not here for him. They're here for the paperwork." I understood immediately. She meant the will. No one had said it out loud, but the air was already heavy with waiting. The next day, we went to the lawyer's office. He had known my grandfather for years, handled everything. When we walked in, my dad and his brothers were already there. So was my mom. That surprised me. She hadn't been married to my grandfather in decades. But I guess some people think expectations come with no expiration date. The lawyer began reading the will. It was short and clear. The house, land, and farm were left to my aunt. The remainder of the estate, $1 million, also to her. Any belongings or assets not listed would be distributed at her discretion. The rest of the sons were to receive nothing. Any additional funds from asset sales were to go to charity. Silence fell. You could hear the wall clock ticking. My father didn't speak. One of his younger brothers stood up, started yelling, accusing the lawyer of fraud. My mom stared at me. I didn't meet her eyes. She didn't say a word. When we stepped outside, my aunt said, "I knew he'd do the right thing, right to the end." I nodded. I didn't have anything to add, but something in me shifted. Like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally fallen away. We drove back the next day. We didn't talk much. Somewhere along the road, she reached over, rested her hand on my shoulder, and said, "He wanted you to really live. Not just get by, so live. Not out of duty, out of freedom." I remembered those words deeply because I already knew I'd need them soon. We came back home 2 days after the funeral. My aunt barely spoke on the drive, and I didn't push. There was a strange kind of calm, like everything that could hurt had already passed. That evening, she made tea and we sat on the porch. I thought that was it, that life would simply move on from here. No big moment. But the next day, she called me into the kitchen. She slid an envelope across the table and said, "This is yours. He wanted you to do something real with it." Inside were bank documents. In my name, $1 million. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at the papers, thinking maybe they were fake, like some elaborate prank. But my aunt added, "He left everything to me. But I know who he really meant it for. You always said you wanted to build something. Now you can." I didn't cry, didn't cheer. I just sat beside her, leaned my head against her shoulder, and stayed quiet for a long time. It wasn't about the money. It was about the trust. The fact that someone believed I was worth betting everything on. The very next day, my mother called. At first, I didn't recognize the voice. She sounded unfamiliar. She started off warm, asked how I was, how school was going, how my aunt was doing. I listened and waited. Then it came, soft, casual, almost innocent. "So we heard your grandfather left everything to you. That's surprising." I didn't reply. She kept going. "Your father and I are so proud of you. We know you have a big future ahead. Maybe we could help you manage it? Advise you on what to invest in. You're still young?" I turned off my phone. That evening, my dad called. He didn't speak for a while. Then he said he'd heard about the money, that he was happy for me, that we should all reconnect. That family's important, that he remembered taking me fishing. I said nothing, just ended the call. The next day, I returned to my dorm. He was standing outside near the entrance. I saw him through the glass, holding a bag, like maybe it had food in it, waiting. I walked past him without slowing down. He called my name. I didn't look back. It was clear. No words were needed. These people had left my life a long time ago, and now they were back, not because they missed me, but because I now had a number with 6 zeros next to my name. I didn't feel angry, just tired, like someone was knocking on a door they'd walked away from years ago, and I had quietly locked it behind them. I went to my room, switched my phone to airplane mode, laid down and closed my eyes. My aunt's words echoed in my head. Live not out of duty, out of freedom. So I did. I agreed to the meeting, not because I wanted to, but because I was curious how far they'd go. My aunt asked if I was sure. I nodded. There was no hope left in me, just a cold kind of clarity. They picked the restaurant. It was one of those places that tried hard to feel warm and nostalgic. Soft lights, jazz in the background, menu designed to look handwritten. They arrived looking polished, trying too hard, smiling like everything was fine. They talked about how proud they were of me, how happy they were to see me doing well. Asked about college, my plans, my life. All very polite, very rehearsed. But their eyes gave it away. They were waiting for a moment. It came somewhere between the main course and dessert. My mother gently shifted the conversation toward the future, said I was an adult now, with real responsibilities, that maybe I needed help managing things. My father chimed in with mention of a financial advisor friend who worked with young people like me. It sounded like a brochure. And then it came, clear and direct. They said my half-sister needed tuition for private school, that my father was behind on his mortgage. They said it like it was normal, like I was supposed to say yes. Just helping family, they said, as if that word still meant anything coming from them. I didn't feel shocked, just still. It became obvious. They hadn't come for me. They came for the 60 number next to my name, and they wanted a piece of it. I remembered standing alone at graduation, the silence from them during all those years, how I'd filled out every form with my aunt's name, and now these people, who'd erased me before I even turned 18, thought they had a claim. They kept talking, but I stopped listening. I stared at my hands, my watch, the way the ice was melting in my glass, and I felt it. Freedom. I didn't owe them civility. I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them anything. I stood up, left money for my meal on the edge of the table, and walked down. They didn't call after me. Maybe they understood there was nothing left to say. It was raining outside. The restaurant lights reflected in the puddles. I walked slowly. No anger, no relief. Just one quiet thought. This chapter was over. There was a time I waited for them to come back. Now I just want them never to show up again. A week after the dinner, my mother called again. She spoke quickly, skipping pleasantries. My half-sister needed help covering her last semester. Dad was being harassed by debt collectors. The family was struggling. You have money now, she said. It's just a gesture of support. I listened in silence. She didn't ask how I was doing. Not about school or my health or my life. Just numbers. Deadlines. I said no. She didn't argue. Just hung up. 2 days later, the bank called. My aunt, not me. Turns out my father had given them her number. They were polite but firm. Your nephew could help. He's the only son. He's responsible. My aunt listened quietly, hung up, and that evening said to me, they won't stop until you say it out loud. I knew what she meant, and I was ready. I called my father myself. He answered almost immediately, sounded tired. He tried to speak calmly, said something about second chances, about how things could still be fixed. I let him talk, didn't interrupt, and then I said, you didn't just leave me behind. You taught me what indifference sounds like, what it feels like, and for that I thank you, because now I know how to draw boundaries, and you're on the other side of them, permanently. There was a long silence, then he exhaled and said, I thought you'd forgive me. I answered, I forgave myself for waiting. He hasn't called since. Neither has my mother. No more. Let's talk. No more. You're still family. No more pleas, excuses, or promises. Just silence. And honestly, that silence is the best thing they've given me. I invested part of the money into my business. The rest is sitting in savings. I'm studying, working, visiting my aunt. Sometimes I drive out to the farm. My grandfather's house is still there, empty. I haven't sold it. I'm keeping it. For the one person who believed in me when no one else did. Not long ago, I passed by a school. Parents stood outside with flowers waiting for their graduates. Some were hugging, some were arguing. I looked at them and thought, maybe someday I'll be a father. And if I am, I'll show up. Not out of guilt, but because kids aren't a side note to a new life. They are the life. I didn't retaliate, didn't make a scene, didn't drag them through the mud. I just ended it. Quietly, for good.